It's Wednesday, the 21st of September. This is Politics Live. Joining me today, Conservative MP Faye Jones, Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth, author and journalist Paul Mason and Mark Littlewood of the free market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Today, Vladimir Putin announces a partial military mobilization and delivers this threat.
If the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will, without question, use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff.
Help for firms hit by sky-high energy prices.
It's a huge support for business to ensure that they can cope with the rise in the price of energy that's come essentially from Putin's war.
We'll hear from the hospitality industry about whether it'll be enough to keep the pubs open.
We do have to take difficult decisions to get our economy growing. We have to look at our tax rates.
Will Trussonomics make us all richer?
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful.
Politicians swear an oath of allegiance to the King. Can Charles III put politics behind him? Well, let's start by listening to a little bit more of that rather chilling address to the nation by Vladimir Putin. It was supposed to be given last night, but in fact, it happened early this morning.
I repeat, we're talking of a partial mobilization only. Only people in the military reserve will be drafted. The priority will be on people who served in the armed forces, who have military specialization and experience. The decree on partial mobilization has been signed. I want to remind those who allow themselves such statements about Russia that our country also has a variety of weapons of destruction. And if the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will, without question, use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff.
Let's talk to our Eastern European correspondent Sarah Rainsford, who was expelled from Moscow last year after more than 20 years reporting there. Welcome to you, Sarah. Let's start with that partial mobilization. Is that an admission by Vladimir Putin that things are not going to plan?
Well, I think it certainly looks that way, yes. I mean, obviously, he's not going to say that. Obviously, he's still claiming, and he has claimed today, that everything is going according to plan, and that the plan remains to control the eastern Donbass region of Ukraine, which is why Vladimir Putin initially claimed that he launched what he called a special operation, but which is clearly a war. So this is partial mobilization. Vladimir Putin has stopped short of a general mobilization. So he's talking about mobilizing people from the reserves. His defense minister has said that that could be up to 300,000 Russian men. But I think it's quite clear that the scale of this could be far greater. We've certainly seen a lot of worried people rushing to buy tickets out of Russia. The reports coming in that tickets to Armenia and to other countries are selling out very, very fast. And I think, this is a real test now of whether there really is the kind of support for Vladimir Putin's war inside the country that he has been claiming all along.
Right, well, that is very interesting, because he also goes on to say that he will use all means at our disposal if Russia's soon-to-be, as we assume, annexed territories are attacked. Just explain the context of that.
Well, this is Russia's president trying to draw some very, very thick red lines inside Ukraine. Now, what has happened is that the regions where Russian troops are currently occupying Ukrainian territory, 4 specific regions of Ukraine in the east and the south, those regions have said that they will hold referendums this weekend on requesting to join Russia, so to be annexed by Russia. Now, what Vladimir Putin has said today is that he will support the results of those referendums, which we expect quite clearly will request to join Russia. Then Vladimir Putin has said this means that these territories will be part of Russia, and Russia will defend its new, essentially, borders, its territory, its sovereignty, its independence and its freedom, as he put it. So he has said he'll use all means at Russia's disposal, and he's quite clearly made that a nuclear threat. So it is an attempt to stop Ukraine pushing any further with its counter-offensive. And it comes in the context of Ukraine retaking territory inside Ukraine itself, inside its own territory, from Russian forces. It comes in the context of Russia failing in this war.
Sarah Rainsford, thank you very much. Paul, let me start with you. How seriously should we take this threat? As Sarah Rainsford said, he is talking about nuclear weapons.
Well, I would start by saying that the territorial integrity of Russia is not under threat. He is planning to, in a series of fake referenda over the weekend, grab 4 parts of another country, Ukraine, which has the perfect right to do what it's currently doing, which is to take them back by force of arms. And we have stood on their side, and we should go on standing on their side. When a dictator goes on TV clutching the desk, you notice that, and tells his reservists, only some of you have to go, this is not a man speaking from a position of strength. And I think we have to take, the clue is in the words, this is not a bluff, means that he is on his last legs in terms of, not in power, he's got strong support in power, but he's losing the war. This is an act of desperation, and we in the West should treat it as such. And what we should learn about all dictators, don't be scared of them.
Well, they're quite brave words, because it is a dangerous moment too, particularly in the context of this address. Do you think, Faye, that countries like the UK should change in any way their approach to this conflict?
No, I think Paul is absolutely right that we must be as steadfast as possible and continue everything that we have done over the last 7 or 8 months in standing up against Russian aggression. I really do pay tribute right across the House of Commons. There is unanimity on this, and I think that is extremely important. That sends a very clear signal to Russia that the UK is as one on this issue.
Do you have any fears at all, Jonathan, about countries' resolve across the world in terms of dealing with President Putin?
Well, it's obviously a very serious moment, but there is unity, I think, across this panel. Not everyone spoke yet, but there's certainly unity so far, and there's certainly political unity across the political parties. You know, we have supported the government in the support that they have given to the Ukraine. We will continue in that support, and I think it is clear now that Russia are failing. There is still possibly a long way to go, but at the moment it's clear that Russia is failing, and it's the role of the UK to work with its allies to ensure the resolve across the world does not weaken. Right,
but how do you do that? I mean, listening to that, Mark Littlewood, I mean, will President Putin's address lead to some countries, do you think, questioning their support?
I fear it might, but I think it also just depends how long this goes on for. There'll be unanimity between the 4 of us, I think, on how to approach it. But supposing this were to go on for another year, another 2 years, another 3 years, I'm not a psychologist. I can't work out whether Putin's merely bad or mad. And as he's losing, what will he do if he gets desperate? I mean, one can be heartened by the progress the Ukrainians have made, whilst being concerned that Putin being boxed into a corner, something really terrible could happen. I don't have an answer to that, but that is quite a chilling thought.
And what might escalate that further is in President Putin's mind of Western weapons being used on this territory that he will consider Russian, to go back to your point about the integrity of Russia. Then what happens?
Let's be just clear. Kherson, a city of 250,000 people, largely working-class people, industrial workers, Ukrainians. When the Ukrainian army began its attack 30 miles away, there was an uprising on the very day, you know, an armed uprising by people which failed. This is not just the West attacking Putin. It is Ukrainians trying to liberate themselves. I think what they're going to need is more arms, more ammunition, and more open intelligence and more open intelligence and logistical cooperation. Whatever the Americans are doing to help the Ukrainians win in places like Kharkiv Oblast, they're not telling us. I think they should just openly say to Putin what they're doing. And, you know, after all, he is a man floundering. 300,000 people being told, go to the front, who could have gone to the front on the 24th of Feb if they'd have felt like it, because they don't feel like it, because they're computer programmers, men with families, professionals. They have no desire whatsoever to go and die for Russian ethno-nationalist fantasy.
Right, but as Mark was saying, Jonathan, if this keeps going on, as it looks as if it might, for another year or so at least, President Erdogan of Turkey has said words to the effect of Putin needs a dignified way out of this crisis. What does that look like exactly?
Well, I mean, that is the gamble that Putin is taking, isn't it? But I think that the response of the West remains united, and we have a role as United Kingdom in ensuring that resolve does not weaken. Look, right. I mean, other countries, presidents and prime ministers will offer their remarks, but as far as I can tell, and I've got to, I mean, I'm not an expert on international relations, but as far as I can tell, where we stand at the moment, we are completely united in responding to Putin, and I don't think Putin can possibly succeed.
Is there a dignified way out, Paul?
No. I mean, look, the man himself said in 2018, what is the point of the world if Russia is not in it? He has reiterated there is no place for Western values in our society. Those Western values, I'm afraid for him, are shared by millions of Russian people who we can't hear at the moment. I was last there in 2018. My meetings were full. My book launches full of Western thinking, democratic, modern, LGBT capitalism, as they call us, people. And he's not just fighting the West, he's fighting the flow of history towards progress, towards social liberalism. And of course, his entire wealth is based on fossil fuels, and that will be over by the middle of the century. I think we should be confident, optimistic, and yes, build, as Jonathan says, and as you say, active links and solidarity with our Western allies.
But I think we have to match that rhetoric, don't we, with action? And all of our words are completely right, but that's why I think it's really important that we boost defence spending, and the Prime Minister has already committed to that. She's got a target for 3% of GDP, which is very laudable. And also, I think we've worked out that we've spent over £2 billion on supporting Ukraine so far, and she's agreed already to at least that, whatever it takes. So I think it's really important that our actions match what we're saying.
Do you agree with that amount of spending in terms of defence, that it should go up in the way that Liz Truss is
I mean, John Healey, our Shadow Defence Secretary, has been criticising the defence cuts that have taken place under the last 12 years of the Conservatives. So he has made it clear what our position is on defence in that respect.
Right, OK. Well, let's move on and go back to domestic politics here, because the government has confirmed a certain amount of support for businesses when it comes to paying their energy bills against the soaring rise in the cost of energy. Let's have a look at this from the Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
It is providing for the non-domestic market, which includes schools and hospitals, charities and businesses, something that is equivalent to the support for the domestic sector. It's more complicated because there isn't a price cap for the non-domestic sector, but it will have an equivalent effect.
Right. The scheme, as we understand it, will be in place for 6 months, and it could cut most bills for businesses or non-households by as much as half. Let's talk to Emma McClarkin, Chief Executive of British Beer and Pub Association. Before we get into the detail, Emma, what has been the situation for businesses? Because there isn't and hasn't been a cap up until now.
It has been extremely difficult for the beer and the pub sector post the pandemic and the Ukraine situation, combined with the cost of living. But with these energy hikes, it was simply erasing all their profitability in one hit. So to take action on this energy crisis is absolutely critical to survive, if we are to survive this winter.
Right. Is it going to be enough, though, to stop businesses collapsing?
Well, it is a very significant and critical intervention that the government is making. It does need to be very clear, though, what this actually translates to for businesses. They need to understand the discount so they can effectively plan for that in their business models and moving forwards. And of course, we'll need to know what happens and what the longer term plan is post the 6 months.
What is the government offering as far as you know and the detail we have?
Well, there is going to be a cap of sorts. It's on the wholesale price, which is more complicated to get the equivalent, as the state just said. But the reality of the impact of this on pubs that they have worked out in one example is around 40% reduction in the increases that we were seeing coming in through in energy. So we're hopeful that it will make at least a third's difference throughout the bills this winter.
Right, and how are you actually going to be helping communicate that out to the businesses affected?
Well, we have put out what the government has in its press release and its temporary guidance on the details, but it is going to be very, very difficult. It is not as transparent as we had hoped to make it on the kilowatt per hour. That will be happening automatically applied to billings at the end from October on, but it won't be evident in the contract rates that people are entering into. And we do still need to have reassurance that when people are entering into new contracts, that there won't be the demand for upfront security deposits, which is preventing us getting access to fair supply in the first place.
Emma, thank you very much for joining us. What do you say to Emma's point there in terms of transparency and the ease for businesses to actually get the support and the discounts?
I think Emma's right. You know, I think there is a lot of detail in there that we need to see as quickly as possible. I would have liked to see that announcement made on the floor of the House of Commons so that we could scrutinise that and ask questions. Hopefully we'll get that over the coming days. Obviously, we have a fiscal statement on Friday. But, you know, businesses are really, really worried. I've been talking to a lot of my high street businesses. You know, my constituency is very small business heavy, and they are really concerned about how they're going to see these out. So one thing that I'm looking for in this package is making sure that the government really understands about seasonal businesses, about rural businesses who are, you know, not on the gas grid. So there's a lot of detail that we need to get out of this.
Right, because, I mean, some of the increases are as high as 400% until this announcement is made because there hasn't been any sort of cap. Has it just come too late as well? Labour has been calling for this for weeks and weeks. Has it just come too late for many businesses?
I don't believe so. I think the government has been very proactive on this in this whole space over the last 8 months. You know, £37 billion of support for vulnerable households early in this year. Of course, that's going to have an impact on a lot of small businesses. So I think, you know, to give the Prime Minister her full credit, this has been her #1 priority, and she's getting after this really quickly.
Jonathan?
Well, we have been calling for help for some weeks. From my own point of view as a Leicester Member of Parliament, I know, because I've been talking to them, that our businesses, our small businesses, have been crying out for help for some weeks now, particularly those in hospitality, particularly those in restaurants, in pubs, small cafes and so on. And you've got to remember, in the Leicester context, we were a city who were kept in a separate lockdown longer without adequate recompense for that separate lockdown. So I've been really worried about how this is going to affect jobs and livelihoods in my constituency. The problem is, at the moment, is I don't know how to communicate what's been announced to my constituents because it's still unclear. And it's an irony that Jacob Rees-Mogg, the great parliamentarian, as he likes to style himself, has not come to Parliament to explain it so we can ask him questions.
What do you make of it in principle? Is this the right way to help businesses, Mark?
No, it's not. It's not the way I would have gone about it. But even an ardent free market libertarian like me thinks that something needs to be done here, right? Energy prices are an absolute nightmare. I would have preferred them not to fix the price, to actually have targeted business bailouts, support, give them cash handouts. Once you actually start fixing the price of energy, you don't get rational consumption patterns. I mean, if energy is half the price that it should be, you might risk blackouts. You'll get overconsumption. So if you had £150 billion package to help, I would have done it as cash handouts, not as price fixing.
Paul?
Well, that's not the way we've gone. And we are getting a major bailout of the private sector by the government. The debate later this week will be, how is it paid for? And I think that's going to be the big debate, in the sense that we're going to pay for it through taxation rather than from an immediate windfall tax on the energy firms. But that having been said, we are right to worry about businesses, because let's just think about it. What's the difference between a business and a household? Households can go bust. You can declare yourself bankrupt. But the whole of society sort of is geared to for that not to happen. Businesses have to declare themselves insolvent if they can't pay their bills. It's not legal to trade while insolvent. And insolvency and bankruptcy are routine things for businesses. When you look at your even if it's only gone up 40%, a pub, a hair salon, a laundrette, and you think, I just can't pay that. For a business, it's very easy to say, there's the keys, I'm walking away, I have my own family stuff to think about. Many SMEs, small business people, think that way. That's the worry, that we end up within the lateness of this intervention, and its lack of specificity even now leads to a scale of unnecessary and unwanted insolvencies in the private sector.
Faye?
Well, I'll give you on the lack of specificity, if I can say that word. But we are going to have a fiscal event on Friday. And, Jo, I feel really bad. Every time I'm on this programme, it's a day before the budget or a day before a fiscal event.
Don't feel bad.
There's nothing for me to say.
Oh, well, yes, feel bad about that.
So, you know, we do have to wait and see what comes out on Friday. But, you know, this could not be more important right now. And I think, we can certainly have an argument about how we should have intervened and when and how we're going to pay for it. But this is an economic shock, the likes of which our country has not seen in centuries. So thinking outside the box and extraordinary action is really what's required.
Right. Well, do you agree with that? This is not the time to be talking about who will ultimately pay. It's just more about helping people in the here and now.
No, of course it is the time to talk about who will pay, because we have a completely different view to the government on this, and I suspect this will be picked up as we move into more discussion. But look, why shouldn't the big oil and gas corporations who've been making massive profits, why shouldn't we extend the windfall tax onto their profits? Why are we going ahead, apparently, with not increasing corporation tax? Why are we talking about increasing bankers' bonuses when there are people in my constituency who won't be able to pay their energy bills even after the interventions that have been made?
Mark?
For a package on this scale, you can raise a bit from a windfall tax if you want. But if you are going to spend £150 billion in round numbers, if that's what the package is, the windfall tax doesn't scratch that. I mean,
but does that mean you shouldn't do it at all?
I don't like the idea of, however well-intentioned politicians picking on a particular sector or a particular company, a particular area, and saying you're going to be taxed at a different rate to every other sector. I don't like them doing that when profits are good. I don't like them bailing out companies when profits are bad or losses are made. If you were going to have a package on anything like this scale, basically it has to be paid for out of general taxation. The overwhelming majority of it does anyway.
Jonathan?
Yeah, but at the moment they're just loading it all on borrowing, aren't they? And that's what people have got
future tax.
Yeah, where at the moment we know that the gas and oil producers have made huge profits. There are question marks. I know we will no doubt disagree about. We'll disagree about corporation tax, but why should we not go ahead with those corporation tax increases? Why have they been put in the bin by Liz Truss when companies are making huge profits? Why are we apparently talking about tax cuts which will, in terms of their distributional impact, will benefit richer households more, when households in my constituency are facing an energy bill which has gone from £1,200 to £2,500 this October, on top of universal credit being cut by £20 a week, and on top of benefits being cut in real terms by £25 a week. That is not fair.
To come from general taxation.
Sorry?
Right? How much do you think you could raise from this?
Of course, general taxation. Of course, general taxation should play a role, but you should use all the levers at your disposal. And we are giving corporations, big business, the windfall. We're not doing a windfall tax, or a bit more of a windfall tax on gas and oil producers, while people are going to starve and go to food banks. That is not fair.
I think what's really important is that we look to the long term. We try and iron out our energy problems for the long term. In fairness, that's what this government is doing. A windfall tax would prevent that. We've talked about the impact that would have on investment in renewables. And, I think it is really important. We are talking about in the hundreds of billions when it comes to spending. Labour's plan only generates £8 billion. It wouldn't touch the surface.
Well, look, you could expand the windfall tax, but the point is, in society, when people are seeing a real terms pay cut, when those on welfare payments, whether it's universal credit or pensioners, have seen deep real terms cuts in the value of that, how can it be right that corporations and gas and oil producers are making huge profits, not because of their entrepreneurial spirit, but simply because they have sat there while global energy markets have unfolded as they have? We should be taxing that and using some of that money to be supporting households and businesses now.
Well, let's take a look at this headline in The Sun, because it flows from some of what Jonathan's been saying. PM's push for growth. Liz Truss, tax cuts for all, even the rich. It says underneath, I might be unpopular. Who'd think that for a politician for some point? But just let's take that principle, tax cuts for all, even the rich. You supported, Faye, Rishi Sunak in the leadership contest. During that campaign, he and his supporters, including you, presumably, said that removing the national insurance rise, in other words, tax cuts, were immoral. What's changed your mind?
Well, I don't think I've used that language.
Well, that was the word that was used by Rishi Sunak's campaign.
But, rehashing the leadership election is not really going to get us any far.
It's the principle, though. Do you still think it is immoral? All right, if you don't want to use that word, but do you still think it is wrong to actually reverse or remove or cancel the rise in national insurance contributions?
I don't think there's anything wrong in looking at ways of creating growth in this country, and that's something that we haven't been able to do for decades. So I think, doing things differently is absolutely what we need to do. And I really do commend the PM for the radical approach that she's prepared to to take, because that's how big our challenges are right now.
Right, and you, of course, supported... Well, you supported this precise policy, didn't you, Jonathan Ashworth, removing the national insurance rise? You didn't want it in the first place, so presumably you're with Liz, tax cuts for all, even the rich.
We didn't think it was the right moment to put up national insurance at that particular moment.
Right, so you agree with Liz Truss?
I cannot understand how removing the cap on bankers' bonuses while telling workers they've got to take a real terms pay cut will grow our economy. If you want to grow your economy, it has to be sustainable and all must share in it. Our poverty and inequality is holding back our ability to grow our economy, not by giving big tax cuts to the rich. That's not going to grow our economy sustainably.
The tax burden is at an extraordinary level in the United Kingdom at the moment. We might have an argument about whether you want corporation tax to be different or higher or income tax, but the total burden of tax is the highest it has been for 70 years. I think that in part explains the sluggish growth that we've had over the last 10 or 15 years. And if you get into an economic cycle in which 1%, 1.5% growth rates are the norm, and we've managed to get ourselves into that cycle since the global financial crash, a lot of these other problems are exacerbated. If you can move to the sort of tax burden that existed when, for example, Tony Blair was Prime Minister, that would be lower than today as a proportion of GDP. I think that does encourage growth. And if we could just get back somehow to 2.5%, 3% long-term trend growth rates, I'm not saying that's a silver bullet for everything, but wow, it mitigates
I don't
a
disagree,
lot of
but you're not going to do it by allowing bankers to get massive bonuses.
Will it work?
Look, what this is a kind of sugar rush, isn't it? It's like drinking a kind of full fat Coke before you begin a marathon. Feel great for the first 10 minutes, and then you'll crash and burn.
Speak for yourself.
That's
on the marathon front.
Exactly, yes. Not advisable. What we are talking about here is the absence of a credible economic model. Because it's not true that growth has been low for decades. Growth was fine until the financial crisis. It hammered our economy because we failed to adapt quickly enough. We were told by Osborne and Cameron, cut the size of the state and the economy, the private sector will grow. It didn't. We were then told Brexit, that will unleash the power of Britain. It hasn't. We're left with a country marooned on the edge of Europe, can't do a trade deal with America, in a deglobalizing world where China and Russia are going their own way, and what we need for sources of growth are two: redistribution of wealth to working people, yes, so they can spend more, and investment, which has to be state-directed, because the British private sector, with its propensity to build speculative skyscrapers, as you'll see in London's Vauxhall, with foreign money, is not attracting productive investment.
Right. Well, what do you say to all that, Faye? Because Liz Truss said in a relatively recent interview that looking at everything through the lens of redistribution is wrong. So fairness doesn't matter anymore.
Well, I think we do have to do things differently. I think it's really important that, as I say, recognising the scale of the challenges that we have been through in terms of COVID and now in terms of energy, we are in a really different place than we've ever been before. So I do think it's right to be radical and to, Jonathan likes to go on about bankers' bonuses, and I get that gets a lot of traction on social media, but we don't know. We don't know what's happening. And let's not do these industries down. They are, the financial services sector is responsible for about 276 billion to the UK economy. That's not to be sniffed at.
Right, but let's look at the issue of fairness. That's perhaps what Paul was talking about. Or, as Mark was saying, if it leads to growth, it will be worth it. But the one policy that we are expecting from this fiscal event, amongst many, is this cancelling of the national insurance rise. The richest 10% in this country will save around £1,800 a year. The poorest will get about £8. Is that fair?
I think, again, we have to look at growth. We have to look at growing our economy. And I think being radical is absolutely important.
But why does it grow our economy to give the rich big tax cuts and give bankers big bonuses? But if you're on universal credit or a pensioner, you've seen the value of your universal credit or pension cut in real terms. If you're a worker, you've seen the value of your wages lost to the ravages of inflation and cut in real terms. Well, why is a banker's bonus going up going to bring inflation under control and grow our economy? Why aren't we doing things like increasing the labour supply, right? Employment is lower than it was before the pandemic. We've got more and more people leaving the jobs market, and there's no policy whatsoever to support people to move back into work. In fact, the schemes that have been in place have actually failed.
Why does cutting taxes for the wealthy benefit wider society, Mark?
Oh, I think you need to get incentives right, and I think taxes are too high at the moment to properly incentivise people. It's not just a question, and if people want to climb the income ladder, they are incentivised to do so if tax rates are not punitive. Not only are tax rates punitive, in my view, we have the most complicated tax rule book on planet Earth. I mean, it's several times the length of War and Peace. It's absurd. Endless loopholes and carve-outs absolutely everywhere. I would like the entire tax rule book rewritten. And to Jonathan's point, I mean, if you are trying to reduce tax, and I would like to see very, very substantial tax reductions, it's almost impossible to do that in a way in which the lowest 10% would benefit as much as the top 10%, because those who pay more tax will get more of those cuts.
Well, I'll tell you one person who doesn't agree with the idea of trickle-down economics, not talking presumably about Liz Truss's policy, but President Biden here. I'm sick and tired of trickle-down economics. It has never worked. We're building an economy from the bottom up and middle out. Why can't it work, trickle-down economics?
Well, let's remember that Joe Biden tweeted that within 24 hours of having driven through Hounslow, OK, on his way back, or the London suburbs, presumably looked out of the window of his car. He had a great reminder that even here in the capital...
Do you think that's what helped him write that?
Well, it's clearly a dig at Truss, because he'd just been in the capital of trickle-down economics.
Well, we won't know that, but let's get back to the trickle-down economics.
Let's be clear. Trickle-down economics in the 90s for Clinton and Blair was at the very least an objective. They thought if you unleash the private sector, the financial sector, cut back the state a bit, wealth will trickle down, and that is our objective. Truss hasn't even stated that as an objective. It's a byproduct of financial deregulation and going for growth through tax cuts. I think everybody in the kind of the world of analysts and finance knows that we are taking a big risk here with the sugar rush, a barber boom, those who remember it, early 70s, a 18-month rush of quasi-growth followed by a slump and no long-term change in an economy characterised by what? Poor communities, Jonathan. Your community as well, Brecon. Poor communities everywhere. How do we get them out of poverty? Not by cutting the taxes of people who live in Mayfair.
Mark?
You've got to cut taxes across the board, and I think Liz Truss, I'm rather encouraged, actually. I'm feeling a bit optimistic about this government. But there is actually a plan. There is actually... The plan is go for growth, right? The plan is our growth rates of 1.5%...
It's been the plan for 2 decades.
Well, I think she and the administration are now going to make a serious judgment on whether each policy really is pro-growth. That will be a top priority. We had a hell of a lot of regulation brought forward which has not been pro-growth, and I think that Truss is likely to prioritise that. Now, maybe she won't get there, but what she's trying to do is to get our growth rates back up to 2.5–3% per annum. That is the strategy. I personally think lighter touch regulation, lower taxes across the board and simpler taxes are a good way of getting there.
Paul?
They're one way, but wherever they've been tried, in the developed world, it hasn't worked.
Is it? Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I don't think you can argue that this is a case of trickle-down economics, because that ignores the intervention that the government made back in May of £37 billion for the most vulnerable, and that was a targeted package, and that is absolutely what we need to do, because there are going to be people who've got broad enough shoulders over the next 6 to 12 months who can withstand the cost of energy, but there are people who really, really cannot, and it's imperative that the government keeps that in mind, and the evidence is there. We have been doing that.
Jonathan?
Yeah, but the package that was announced by a different chancellor under a different Tory leadership. It's still happening.
That money is landing in the bank accounts of the most vulnerable.
It comes on the back of £1,000 cuts to universal credit, a real terms cut to benefits of around £25 a week, when the energy bills are going up from £1,200 to £2,500 next October. There will still be people in fuel poverty even after that change.
How big a risk is this? You don't like the amount of borrowing in principle, even if you accept, Mark, in this particular case, that it may be necessary. You're a friend of Liz Truss, I think we can say that, and broadly support the policies. But it is a gamble, isn't it, also in terms of the markets? We may get an interest rate decision that may increase interest rates by 0.5, 0.75, we don't know. Inflation, it might have come down a tiny bit, but it is heading upwards. How much of all this this in the round is a risk for the UK economy?
Well, I think it's a risk to do nothing as well. I think this rather sort of steady-as-she-goes managerialism that we've had over the past 10 years has not, it might have been safe, but has not delivered particularly impressive...
Boris Johnson did not look like a safe and managerial
stylistically, but his economic policies were hardly bold. They were statist, interventionist.
But
there wasn't much free market stuff from Boris Johnson.
It's an important point, isn't it? If the bank puts up interest rates of 4.5%, which is being talked about by various different analysts, why doesn't that stifle growth? Why doesn't that dampen demand on your scenario?
Interest rates need to go up because
that dampens demand.
We have had ludicrously low interest rates.
So you think interest rates should go up? So tax cuts on one hand, but mortgage increases on the other.
We can't keep interest rates at real terms sort of minus 6% forever. At some point, we need to get back to the norm that interest rates are about plus 2% in real terms. No. I'm not saying we do that overnight, but that is a sign of a normal, healthy economy. Interest rates of minus 6%, absolutely absurd.
Well, let me just show you this then on the front of the Times. Trust to cut stamp duty in push for prosperity. Good idea, Faye?
I think getting the market moving would be a good thing. I think any tax is a disincentive. I think moving is important. Let's try and get more young people moving. But yeah, it's not. It's a regressive tax. It's not one I'm a fan of. I paid £17,000 when I moved earlier on this year, and so I think if we can find a way, as Mark says, to reduce the tax burden, that's no bad thing.
Well, what would be interesting is, as well as the issues like that to deal with demand in the housing market, Liz Truss and others have been saying, and I don't know what you think, be interested, that we need to do more to relax our planning rules to increase the supply of housing. But Conservative MPs always vote against that, don't they?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that in terms of, obviously where I live, planning rules are governed by the Welsh Government. I'd be so grateful if you could pass on to your colleagues that if we do cut stamp duty in England, could we do the same in Wales? Because Mark Drakeford wouldn't do that.
MPs go for these planning changes?
Mark Drakeford wouldn't do that.
Mark Drakeford wouldn't do that,
so my constituents lost out, whereas people in England did OK.
But do you agree with deregulating further planning in order to boost supply, for example?
I think there does need to be more liberalism in the planning sector, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but are your colleagues going to vote or accept that?
We'll see when that comes. We'll see when we have that debate.
Good idea? Before we move on?
It's a peripheral idea. We are short of an economic model. We are short of a model that directs investment for 30 years into high-wage, high-growth, high-productivity stuff, whether that be smart manufacturing, whether it be services, whether it be R&D. The capital is not flowing into this country, it is flowing out of this country. Our current account, our investment balance is spiralling out of control into the negative, and Sterling's collapse post-Brexit doesn't help. All these things are what Kwasi Kwarteng will be thinking about. And I think throwing at the Times a headline about stamp duty is fine for the Tory faithful. But what we want to see is serious thinking about the economic future of this country. Johnson had a theory about what it was. You said it right. State intervention, dirigism, big state. If you want small state, explain to us how the investment and how the redistribution happens, or don't bother.
All right. Well, the period of mourning for the Queen is over. But today, ongoing, I think, still in the Commons, MPs are swearing oaths of allegiance to the new King Charles III. We can take a look at this now. You may recognise some of them. Let's have a look.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors according to law. So help me God.
That's the former Prime Minister there, as you will recognise, Boris Johnson. But there's been a steady stream, it's optional, but a steady stream of MPs from across the House swearing allegiance. Faye, you used to work for the now former Prince of Wales. What sort of king do you think he'll be?
I think he'll be a fantastic king. He was a superb Prince of Wales. And I'm sure he will find a way within the appropriate confines of his new role as sovereign to continue to talk about the causes that he's talked about for decades. And I really think we owe him a great debt of gratitude. We talk about sustainability and climate change now on a day-to-day basis, and that's because he was brave enough all those decades ago to say it when it was really, really unpopular. And it's not just climate change, it's farming, it's building techniques. He's really talked about the things that that matter. And I think that we should be incredibly proud and grateful for him. So I'm looking forward to swearing my oath. I'm going to give it a go in Welsh as well. So
Are you?
Yes, we'll see how we get on.
Well,
it's all the hard words, but we'll give it a go.
Well, good luck with that. Mark, is that what you want to see, a sort of campaigning king on those issues?
I'm a bit worried about this. Look, obviously, there's a huge, outburst of goodwill towards the new king, obviously, at this point in time, and I wish him well. But I mean, talk about big boots to fill. I mean, it's going to be, he did such an amazing job over 70 years. I think he's got it's quite a difficult task to match that. I do not want the monarch talking about policy and climate change and farming policy and building policy. I want you politicians to be doing that. And a great strength of Her Majesty the Queen was she was completely inscrutable, didn't voice any controversial views, certainly not in public. And I'm a bit worried that our new king seems to think that there is a range of he wants to draw up his own manifesto. That's not really what constitutional monarchy is about.
I think that's going far too
He shouldn't
far.
be discussing climate change
I think
policy.
that's going far too far. I don't think if you look back at the films that the prince has been involved, that the king has been involved in, he's made it very, very clear that once he becomes sovereign, he knows that kind of active role that he's been able to play is not appropriate. He's been very clear about that. But Her Majesty the Queen, she lent her patronage to an awful lot of organisations. And I think, personally, I feel very grateful that she was the patron of the Royal Welsh Agricultural Society, which based in my constituency, which champions Welsh agriculture and all of the brilliant stuff it does. So, there are plenty of ways, I think, for the new monarch to demonstrate his support for causes that I think are important to us.
And you're confident he will avoid political controversy? Because that's what worries me, that I think he's more likely to go into areas of political controversy.
I don't think there's
anybody.
I don't think there's anybody in this country who has had better training on what is appropriate for the role of the sovereign, and I think he will be absolutely mindful of his new role and those confines. But he is a passionate person, and I think we should all be grateful to him for
Where
that.
are you on this, Jonathan? I'm just going to show you and everyone this tweet in the Telegraph. Plans are being finalised for the king to make France the surprise choice for his first state visit after he bonded with the President Emmanuel Macron over environmental issues.
Well, look, I don't know the king in the way others on the panel do, but I would have thought that even though he may feel personally strong about many different matters, and every individual does feel strongly about matters, that he will be aware that he's in a different role now as monarch from the Prince of Wales, and I think he'll be very aware of the responsibilities on his shoulders. I also think he will allow the monarchy to evolve and modernise as well, and I think there has been an outburst of tremendous goodwill for the new monarch, and we look forward to seeing how this develops in the coming months and years.
Yeah, you're going to be singing the national anthem for the first time at Labour Party conference to open it up.
Well, the first time.
Well, first time in quite a long while, isn't it?
We do too. Come to ours, we do two anthems.
Apparently we are, but I don't know. I've only gone off what I've read in the newspapers, but yeah, apparently, yeah.
What about you, Paul, in terms of the role being played by King Charles? Are you worried, like Mark, or interesting, like Faye, who sort of wants to encourage a little bit of conversation from him about it?
Well, it's been made, even left-wing journalists have contacts in the palace, and it was made clear to me that it will be a politically neutral monarchy. I have no worries about that whatsoever. There are two worries. One is his own children will then define what the future of the monarchy is. And if you watched that parade, there was this very poignant and prolonged moment with Harry marching in civvies and his brother marching in full dress uniform, which kind of, if I were managing the palace's politics, I would be thinking that's going to be a bit of a dichotomy for quite a long time. But put that aside, I think he will be neutral. I hope we get a slimmed-down royal household, which has been promised. But here's the thing. We as the people, since 1688, have our side of the bargain. He is the sovereign in Parliament. And it is for Parliament to determine, I think, a number of constitutional issues that will come up quickly. I mean, leave aside Scotland. I would like us to seek to come out of this decade with a constitution. I now think it's within reach. I don't want to change any of the constitutional arrangements. I'd just like it written down, please. I mean, I'd never heard of the Royal Company of Archers. I knew who they were. But what I would like to know is what power do they have? What influence do they have in Scottish society? How do you become one? How do you fail to become one? All these things, the unwritten parts of our constitution, I think would be much better thrown into the open. And I think Charles might be someone who, the king, might be someone who might be more amenable to that than one would think.
Good idea or not?
I think it's worth considering. I don't know. I think it's worth considering. I don't see, personally, I don't think we've been going wrong too far the last few hundred years. I think we've been going okay. Let's see.
We're close.
All right, a great vote of confidence there at the end. Thank you to all of our guests for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the BBC iPlayer. It's going to be a busy rest of the week. From all of us here, bye-bye.